The human sat in the back corner of the Tactical Academy's briefing hall, hunched over a data pad, scribbling notes with the kind of intensity that made her look half asleep. Her name was Mira Koves, and by every observable metric, she was the least impressive cadet in our cohort. I should know. I was watching her. My name is Threx, and I'm what you might call a xenosociologist, though that translation doesn't quite capture the full scope of what I do. I observe, I analyze, I report back to the Galactic Concordance on species viability for military integration. Humans had been provisional members for exactly 4 solar cycles, and the verdict was still out on whether they belonged among the stars or back on their muddy little planet playing with sticks. Look at her, hissed Veline, a Crithian whose exoskeleton clicked with barely suppressed amusement. He gestured with one of his 4 manipulator arms toward Mira. She writes in actual symbols on physical material, like a primitive. Does she not understand we have neural interfaces? Surrounding cadets, snickered. The sound rippled through the chamber like static interference, barely contained mockery, that humans probably couldn't even hear at that frequency. But I heard it, and I noted it. Mira didn't look up. Her pen, an actual archaic writing instrument, continued its steady scratch across paper. Scratch, scratch, scratch. In an age where thoughts could be recorded directly from synaptic impulses, she was using tree pulp and pigment. 10 credits says she washes out before practical combat scenarios begin, whispered Nex, a Vorlian whose translator gave his words a wet, gurgling quality. 20 says she doesn't make it through this briefing without falling asleep, countered Zilla, her tentacles quivering with laughter. I said nothing. I simply watched. Commander Vos Khan, our instructor, a decorated Zen theory veteran with scales that bore the patterned scars of 12 campaigns, strode to the holographic display at the chamber's center. The lights dimmed. 3-dimensional representations of a hostile engagement scenario materialized above us, glowing with tactical markers and threat assessments. Today's simulation, Vos Khan announced, his voice carrying the kind of gravel that came from shouting orders through plasma fire, represents an actual engagement from the Outer Reach conflicts. You will be divided into strike teams. Your objective is simple: neutralize the enemy stronghold while minimizing your own casualties. Standard doctrine applies. Question? Silence. Good. Team assignments are now active on your interfaces. You have 20 minutes to review terrain data and formulate strategy. Dismissed to preparation chambers. The room erupted into movement. Cadets clustered into their assigned groups, neural interfaces glowing as they absorb tactical data at speeds that would make a human-computer weep. Holographic displays bloomed around each team like deadly flowers, showing trajectory calculations, weapon ranges, enemy patrol patterns. Mira's team, I noticed with something approaching pity, consisted of the Academy's bottom performers. There was Jex, a Thorian whose spatial reasoning scores were so bad he'd once calculated a jump trajectory that would have sent his squad directly into a star. There was Pillar, a Minoran whose reaction time was roughly equivalent to continental drift. And there was Yorn, a Graxian who had somehow, inexplicably, managed to shoot himself during target practice with a weapon that had no reverse function. They were, in military parlance, completely screwed. And they knew it. Great, Jex groaned, his carapace shifting through colors that indicated extreme distress. We got the human, the one who still uses paper. We're dead. Statistically speaking, Pillar offered in her slow, methodical way, our probability of success has decreased by 47.3% simply by team composition alone. I don't want statistics, Yorn growled. I want to not die. Even in simulation, it hurts. Mira finally looked up from her notes. Her eyes, those strange human eyes with their single focal point and bizarre color variations, scanned her teammates. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked. You done with your crayon drawings? Jex snapped. Because the rest of us are trying to actually prepare for this. Mira blinked once, twice. Then she stood, gathering her papers with deliberate care, and walked to the team's tactical station. She placed her hand on the interface, and the holographic display shifted, zooming into a specific section of the terrain map. Here, she said, her voice quiet. barely audible above the ambient noise of 40 other teams arguing strategy. "We enter here." Jex snorted. "That's a kill zone. Enemy has overlapping fields of fire covering that entire approach." "Did you even look at the tactical markers?" "Yes," Mira replied. She tapped her stack of papers. "I looked at all of them, and I noticed something." "What?" Pella asked, genuine curiosity in her tone despite the obvious futility of the situation. "The simulation is based on an actual engagement from the Outer Reach conflicts," Mira said, still in that maddeningly calm voice. "Commander Vos Khan said so himself, which means it's in the historical database, which means I could look up what actually happened." There was a pause, a very long pause. "That's," Jex started, then stopped. "That's cheating." "Is it?" Mira asked. He said, "Study the terrain data. Historical combat data is terrain data. It tells you where things went wrong, where people died, where strategies failed." She flipped through her papers. "The original strike team that ran this mission lost 68% of their forces in the first engagement. They approached from the northwest, exactly where conventional tactical doctrine suggested. The enemy knew conventional tactical doctrine. They were waiting." Yorn leaned closer, his massive frame casting shadows over the display. "So where do we go?" Mira's finger traced a path through the hologram. "Southeast corridor. It's exposed. It's dangerous. Every tactical algorithm will flag it as suicidal, which is exactly why the enemy won't be watching it as carefully." According to the after-action reports, there was a 15-minute window where enemy forces were repositioned to deal with the main assault. During that window, this corridor was defended by exactly 3 sentries. 3 sentries can still kill us, Pella pointed out. "Not if they're already dead," Mira said. She pulled out another sheet of paper, this one covered in numbers and timing sequences. "We used Jex for long-range elimination. His accuracy scores might be terrible for moving targets, but stationary sentries, he can handle that. Pilla, your reaction time is slow, but your threat assessment is perfect. You spot, Yorn. You're our heavy assault. Once the corridor is clear, you lead the breach. I'll handle tactical coordination and target priority." She said it all without drama, without emphasis, like she was reading a grocery list. Jex's carapace went through 3 different colors, before settling on something that might have been respect mixed with confusion. You mapped out the entire mission." "Yes," Mira said. "That's what the notes were for. Every enemy position, every patrol timing, every weapon placement, every historical decision that led to casualties." She met their eyes, each in turn. "I calculated how to keep us alive." The 20 minutes passed. Teams filed into the simulation chambers, neural interfaces syncing with the combat environment. I followed Mira's team, my own sensors, recording every detail for my report. The simulation began. Conventional teams did exactly what conventional tactical doctrine suggested. They approached from tactically sound positions, used suppressing fire, advanced by the numbers, and they died. Holographic casualty markers bloomed across the battlefield like poisonous flowers. 30% casualties, 40, 50. Mira's team moved through the southeast corridor like ghosts. Jex, that terrible shot with moving targets, eliminated 3 stationary sentries with 3 perfect shots. Pilla's threat assessment pinpointed enemy reinforcement patterns down to the second. Yorn breached the stronghold with the kind of precision that came from knowing exactly where every defender would be. And Mira? She stood in the back, papers in hand, calling out positions and timing with mechanical accuracy. Enemy reinforcements from the north in 15 seconds. Yorn, set charges, and fall back. Jex, covering fire on the marked positions. Pilla, watch R6, there's a patrol route that cycles through in 10, 9, 8. They moved like a surgical instrument. No wasted motion. No hesitation. Every action calculated. Every risk measured. The simulation ended. Final casualty count for Mira's team. 0. Mission completion time. Fastest in the cohort. The briefing hall fell silent as the results displayed. Cadets who had been snickering at the human just minutes before now stared at the tactical breakdown with expressions ranging from confusion to outright disbelief. Commander Vos Khan stood at the display, his scaled face unreadable. He studied the replay, watching Mira's team move through the simulation with that eerie precision. Finally he spoke. "Cadet Koves, explain your methodology." Mira stood, papers still clutched in her hands. "Sir, humans have a saying, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I learned from history, I chose not to repeat it." "You studied the historical engagement," Vos Khan said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, sir. You made the data available, I used it. Conventional tactical algorithms don't incorporate historical analysis at the individual engagement level," Vos Khan continued. "They use aggregate data, broad patterns. You examined a specific instance, every decision, every casualty, every mistake." "Yes, sir." "Why?" Mira looked at him with those strange human eyes, and for the first time I saw something flicker in them. Not pride, not satisfaction. Something colder. "Because aggregate data doesn't tell you how people die, sir. It just tells you that they did. I wanted to know how, so I could make sure my team didn't die the same way." The silence in that chamber was absolute. You could have heard a single molecule of oxygen bump into another. Vos Khan's scales rippled in a pattern I'd never seen before. "Cadet Koves, your performance will be entered into the Academy records as a case study. Dismissed." As Mira returned to her seat, I heard whispers starting. Different whispers this time. Not mockery. Something else. Something that sounded uncomfortably like fear. Because they'd all seen the same thing I had. Those weren't just notes Mara had been scribbling during the briefing. They weren't observations or study materials. They were kill calculations. Every mark on that paper represented a life she'd analyzed, a death she'd studied, a mistake she'd catalogued. She hadn't been daydreaming in the back of the hall. She'd been counting bodies, learning from corpses, turning history's casualties into her survival algorithm. And she'd done it all with a pen and paper, with that quiet intensity that everyone had mistaken for incompetence. I updated my report that evening with a new assessment. Previous notation, human military capability marginal, was deleted. New notation. Humanity possesses capacity for systematic lethality analysis at individual operator level. Recommend elevated threat classification. Because I'd realized something watching Mira work. Something that made my sensory organs contract with instinctive unease. Every species in the concordance prepared for war with algorithms, with neural interfaces, with advanced computational systems. We calculated casualties as acceptable losses, as statistical probabilities, as necessary costs. Humans studied each individual death like it was a lesson. They learned from every single corpse. They turned mortality itself into tactical data. And Mira Koves, the quiet cadet in the back with her primitive paper and pen, she wasn't behind the curve. She was so far ahead of it that none of us had recognized what we were seeing. The other cadets were starting to realize it too. I saw it in how they looked at her now, not with mockery, with something far more primal. They'd laughed at her quiet notes. Now their blood ran cold knowing what those notes actually were. Death tallies. Kill studies. A human doing what humans apparently did best. Learning how to survive by understanding exactly how others had failed to. The next morning arrived with the kind of tension that made even the recycled air feel heavy. I positioned myself near the Academy's main training grounds. Sensors attuned to the subtle shifts in cadet behavior. Word had spread overnight about Mira's performance, and with it came something I hadn't anticipated. Competition. She got lucky, I heard Valon insist to a cluster of cadets near the equipment bay, his exoskeleton clicking with agitated emphasis. One simulation means nothing. Historical data won't help when you're facing actual combat variables. But his voice carried an edge that wasn't there before. Doubt, maybe. Or worse, the recognition that he might be wrong. Commander Vos Khan appeared at precisely 0700 hours, his scaled presence commanding immediate silence. Behind him 3 additional instructors emerged, their various appendages and sensory organs marking them as representatives from the Concordance's most decorated military branches. "Today's exercise will be different," Vos Khan announced, his voice carrying across the grounds without need for amplification. "No historical data, no preparation time. You will face a live tactical scenario with variables introduced in real time. The simulation will adapt to your decisions. There will be no prior engagement to study, no pattern to memorize." His eyes, those predatory Zenfari eyes that could track a target through plasma interference, fixed directly on Mira. "This will test actual tactical capability, not historical memorization. Team assignments remain unchanged from yesterday. You have 5 minutes to reach your simulation pods." The implication was clear. This was a direct response to Mira's performance, a challenge specifically designed to prove that her success was nothing more than academic trick work. I watched her face for reaction. There was none. She simply picked up her bag, the one that presumably still held those primitive papers, and walked toward her assigned pod. Jex caught up to her, his carapace shifting through anxious color patterns. "Hey Koves, no historical data this time. What's the plan?" Mira didn't break stride. "Same as before, we don't die." "That's not a plan, that's an objective." "Then I guess we'll need to be creative," she replied, disappearing into the pod entrance. I followed, my official observer status granting me access to monitor their team's performance directly. The simulation pod was a spherical chamber, 40 meters in diameter, equipped with holographic projectors capable of creating combat environments indistinguishable from reality. The neural feedback systems would make every hit feel real, every mistake register as actual pain, though safely within non-lethal parameters. Supposedly, the team assembled at the pod's center. Around them, the environment began to materialize. Not the structured stronghold from yesterday's exercise, but something far worse. Urban terrain. Collapsed buildings. Multiple elevation levels. Civilian population markers scattered throughout, and enemy contacts. Dozens of them, with movement patterns that shifted every few seconds. Adaptive AI. The kind that learned from your decisions and punished patterns. "Oh, that's just perfect," Yawn muttered, his massive frame somehow looking smaller in the face of the chaotic environment. "How are we supposed to plan for this?" Mira was already moving, not running, not panicking, just walking with purposeful direction toward a collapsed structure that offered elevated position. "Pillar, I need threat assessment on enemy movement patterns. Give me anything consistent." Checks. "Find a position with overlapping sight lines to these 3 intersections." She pointed at specific locations on the holographic terrain. "Yawn, you're with me. We need to establish a defensive position before we can consider offensive action." "Defensive?" Jex questioned, scrambling to his assigned position. "The objective is to eliminate enemy command structure. We can't do that hiding." "We can't do it dead either," Mira countered. She'd reached the elevated position and was already scanning the environment with methodical precision. From her bag she pulled out, impossibly, more paper, and that. "You're taking notes?" Pila asked, her slow voice somehow capturing the absurdity of the situation. "During active combat simulation, I'm documenting patterns," Mira corrected. She was scribbling rapidly now, her eyes moving between the terrain and her paper with mechanical efficiency. "Adaptive AI still needs base parameters. It modifies behavior based on our actions, but it starts from somewhere. I need to know where." Hostile fire erupted from 3 directions simultaneously. The simulation's pain feedback kicked in as rounds impacted near their position. Not direct hits, but close enough that I saw Yawn flinch and Jex's carapace flash distress colors. "They're hurting us," Mira said calmly. Still writing. "Firing pattern is designed, push us toward grid section 7. Pillar, confirm enemy concentration in that area." Pillar's sensory organs extended, processing data streams, confirmed. Heavy concentration, 15 hostiles, with prepared positions. "So we don't go to grid section 7, Jex said, relief evident in his voice. "Wrong," Mira replied. "We absolutely go to grid section 7. There was a collective pause even as simulated rounds continued to impact around their position. I'm sorry? What? Yawn managed. Mira's pen never stopped moving. They want us in grid section 7 because it's a kill box. Prepared positions. Overlapping fields of fire, probably secondary explosives set for when we take cover. It's a perfect ambush site. Which is why we don't go there, Jex repeated, slower this time, like explaining to a particularly dense juvenile. Which is why we do, Mira insisted. But not the way they expect. The AI is adapting to standard tactical doctrine. It's expecting us to either avoid the trap or spring it accidentally. What it's not expecting is for us to trigger it deliberately, from outside the kill zone, and use their own prepared position against them. She finally looked up from her notes, meeting each of their eyes. Checks. You're going to fire on these specific coordinates, not at enemies. At the structural weak points I'm about to mark. The building they're using for cover is already compromised from whatever conflict created this urban terrain. We're going to drop it on them. That's insane, Jex said, but he was already adjusting his weapons targeting parameters. That's effective, Mira corrected. Pele, once the structure collapses, I need immediate assessment of surviving hostiles and revised threat priorities. Yawn, the moment we have visibility, you advance to this position and establish forward presence. Make them think we're committing to full assault. While we do what? Yawn asked. While I calculate our actual approach vector, Mira said, returning to her notes with renewed intensity. The AI will adapt to our building collapse tactic. It'll reposition forces to counter aggressive advancement, which means it'll create gaps elsewhere. I just need to find them. I watched this exchange with growing unease. The other teams, visible through my connection to the Academy's monitoring systems, were engaged in conventional tactical approaches, suppressing fire, coordinated advances, team-based maneuvers that looked impressive and resulted in steady casualty accumulation. 30% losses on average across all teams. Mira's team had yet to take a single hit. Execute, Mira ordered. Jex fired, not at enemies but at specific points on an already damaged structure. His accuracy, so terrible against moving targets, proved devastatingly effective against stationary architectural weak points. The building shuddered, groaned, and collapsed in a precisely controlled demolition that buried 15 enemy positions under tons of simulated rubble. The AI adapted instantly. Enemy forces repositioned, converging on their location with renewed aggression. Exactly as Mira predicted. Pillar, report, Mira demanded. Enemy concentration shifting to grid sections 4 and 8. Our position is about to be surrounded. Good, Mira said, which was absolutely not the word anyone else would have used. Yawn, advance now. Make it obvious. I want every hostile thinking we're committing to frontal assault. Yawn moved, his heavy weapons creating impressive fireworks as he laid down suppressing fire and pushed toward what looked like certain death. Enemy forces oriented on him immediately, recognizing the threat of a Graxian heavy assault specialist, and Mira was moving in the opposite direction, with Jex and Pella following, not running, walking, through a route that shouldn't have existed, between buildings that should have provided no cover, along angles that conventional tactical systems wouldn't have calculated as viable, because they weren't viable, not according to standard doctrine. But Mira wasn't using standard doctrine. She was using something else, something I was beginning to understand with growing dread. She wasn't fighting the AI. She was reading it. Every adaptation it made, every force repositioning, every tactical adjustment, she was documenting and analyzing in real time with that primitive paper and pen. She was turning the AI's own learning algorithm into predictable behavior. All forces are committed to containing Yawn, Pella observed. He cannot survive much longer. He doesn't need to, Mira replied. He just needs to hold their attention for 90 more seconds. Mark. They emerged behind enemy lines, not through clever infiltration or stealth technology, but through pure mathematical certainty. Mira had calculated the exact gaps in enemy coverage created by their adaptive response to Yawn's assault. Jex, these targets, this sequence, Mira said, her voice still maddeningly calm as she handed him a sheet of paper with marked positions. Peller shield disruption on my signal. We're going to collapse their command structure in the next 45 seconds. And they did. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't dramatic. It was systematic execution of targets in an order that cascaded through enemy command hierarchy like falling dominoes. Each elimination created confusion that exposed the next target. Each disruption multiplied into organizational collapse. The enemy AI, sophisticated as it was, had based its adaptive responses on the assumption that organic operators couldn't process tactical information faster than its computational cycles. It had never encountered a human who treated real-time combat as a math problem to be solved with paper and pen. Mira's team completed the objective with 0 casualties in 8 minutes and 42 seconds. The next fastest team required 23 minutes and suffered 60% losses. When the simulation pods opened and teams emerged, the training ground fell silent. Even the instructors, beings who had survived actual combat across dozens of campaigns, looked at the tactical breakdown with expressions I couldn't quite interpret. Commander Vos Khan studied the data for what felt like hours. Finally he spoke. Cadet Koves, your team's performance defies standard tactical analysis. Explain your decision-making process. Mira stepped forward, still clutching those papers. Sir, adaptive AI operates on probability matrices. It learns from observed behavior and adjusts accordingly. But that means it's still reactive, not predictive. By documenting its adaptation patterns, I could identify the mathematical boundaries of its decision space. Every adjustment it made narrowed its possible responses until I could calculate exactly where it wouldn't be looking. You're saying you outcomputed a combat AI? Vos Khan said slowly, with paper and primitive calculation methods. No, sir, Mira corrected. I didn't outcompute it. I understood it. Computers make optimal decisions within defined parameters. Humans make suboptimal decisions that work anyway because we operate outside the parameters entirely. The AI couldn't predict me because I wasn't trying to make optimal choices. I was trying to make choices that didn't fit its probability matrices. Valon, who had been listening from the cluster of cadets, suddenly spoke up. That's not how tactical thinking works. You can't just ignore optimal decision trees. Mira turned to face him, and I saw that cold thing flicker in her eyes again. Your team suffered 40% casualties trying to follow optimal decision trees. My team suffered 0 casualties ignoring them. Which approach would you prefer? The silence that followed was broken by one of the additional instructors, a decorated Vorlian combat specialist, whose tentacles bore scars from engagements I'd only read about in classified files. The human raises valid tactical philosophy. Optimal solutions only exist within known variables. Combat introduces unknown variables constantly. Perhaps what we're witnessing is adaptation to uncertainty itself. Vos Khan's scales rippled in that pattern. I still couldn't interpret. Cadet Koves, you've presented the Academy with a significant analytical challenge. Your methods are unorthodox. Your tools are primitive. Your results are exceptional. This creates complications. Sir? Mira asked, genuine curiosity in her voice for the first time. The Concordance military doctrine is built on shared tactical systems, unified strategic approaches, integrated command structures. Your metadori is solitary, individual. It requires cognitive processes that our neural interface systems aren't designed to share or replicate. He paused, those predatory eyes fixed on her. But it works, which means we need to determine whether you're an outlier or a representative sample of human tactical capability. I knew what was coming before he said it. I'd written enough reports to recognize bureaucratic language leading to significant decisions. Effective immediately, all human cadets will be tested using the same protocols we applied to your performance. We need to know if humanity's military value lies in your individual exceptionalism or in broader cognitive advantages we haven't recognized. Mira nodded slowly. And if other humans can't replicate my approach, then you'll be studied as a unique asset, Vos Khan replied. If they can, then we'll need to completely revise our assessment of human military integration. I saw it then, spreading across the faces and sensory organs of every cadet present. That cold understanding that they'd misjudged not just Mira, but potentially her entire species. They'd laughed at her primitive tools, her quiet notes, her archaic methods. Now they wondered what other human capabilities they'd dismissed as primitive incompetence. That evening I completed my report to the concurrents. Previous assessments deleted, new conclusion entered with footnotes, and supporting data that would trigger immediate review at the highest levels. Human military capability assessment requires fundamental revision. Species demonstrates capacity for tactical analysis that operates outside standard computational paradigms. Individual specimen Mira Koves exhibits ability to process combat variables using methodology that appears primitive but produces results exceeding advanced AI systems. Recommend immediate elevation of human integration status pending broader capability assessment. Also recommend psychological evaluation of human military philosophy. They don't calculate acceptable losses, they calculate how to eliminate losses entirely. This represents fundamentally different approach to warfare with implications that require further study. I included the recordings, the tactical breakdowns. The image of Mira with her paper and pen scribbling notes while death unfolded around her in careful, calculated patterns. And I included one final observation that I suspected would trouble the Concordance military command more than anything else. Humans don't prepare for war by building better weapons or faster computers. They prepare by studying how others died and becoming determined not to repeat those deaths. Every human casualty, from any conflict, becomes educational material for future survivors. This creates exponential learning curve that suggests human military capability will continue escalating regardless of technological parity with other species. They're not trying to fight better, they're trying to understand death itself well enough to avoid it permanently. The other cadets gave Mira wider berth now. Not respect, not exactly. Something closer to survival instinct. She was the quiet one in the back who calculated kills with primitive tools and turned mortality into mathematics. She was what humans apparently were beneath their friendly diplomatic exteriors and their enthusiastic cultural exchanges. Survivors who studied death with the same intensity other species studied life. And they'd only just started learning what the galaxy had to teach them about dying. I suspected the Concordance was going to regret underestimating humanity. Not because humans were warriors, though they clearly could be, but because they were something potentially more dangerous. They were students, and the galaxy had just become their classroom, with every battle and casualty serving as lesson material for the next generation of quiet humans taking careful notes on how not to die. Mira Koves packed her papers that evening, adding today's calculations to her growing collection. Somewhere in those pages were the documented deaths of thousands of beings across hundreds of historical engagements, each one studied, analyzed, learned from, each one ensuring that humans would be harder to kill tomorrow than they were today. The thought should have been comforting, given that humans were provisional allies. Instead it was terrifying, because if humans ever became enemies, every battle against them would just make them more dangerous. They didn't just fight, they learned, and they never ever forgot how someone died.